Breaking news regarding the health of two Phils. Frankie goes out in style at Royal Ascot. The number one horse in the world struts his stuff, and more on this episode of the Win Play Show.
Today's video is brought to you by Assiniboia Downs Gaming and Event Center. And be sure to tune in to Trust the Profits Live Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern for Monday Night Lights, hosted by Matthew DeSantis.
Salutations and welcome, horse racing fans, to this episode of the Win Play Show. My name is Matthew DeSantis, and you can find me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Make sure to press that subscribe button to get all of our great content here at Trust the Profits, whether it's Monday and Thursday night live streams, handicapping shows like Capping the Card and Doubling Down, whether it's horse racing news episodes like this one, or specialty topics like Jessica Tugwell's Pedigree Puzzle. We have something for every type of horse racing fan, so make sure to press that subscribe button. Additionally, make sure to like this video and comment with your biggest takeaway from this past weekend. But listen, this is an episode that I recorded earlier on Sunday, and then breaking news took place later in the day on Sunday, and I'm re-recording Sunday evening to make sure that this is the most up-to-date information that I can provide to you. And that was, of course, the breaking news on Sunday, late afternoon, that Larry Rivelli's Ohio Derby winning horse from over the weekend, Two Phils, has sustained an ankle injury. Two Phils has sustained an ankle injury during his very, very impressive 6-length victory in the Grade 3 Ohio Derby at Thistledown on Saturday. He is on his way for further evaluation. However, according to trainer Larry Rivelli, he is going to be out for the rest of the 3-year-old season. And even Rivelli, in quotes to Daily Racing Form, said it is highly doubtful that he is going to ever race again. It does not seem as if the injury is life-threatening at this point, but it does seem as if it would prevent him from ever stepping on the track, certainly for the duration of 2023. And Rivelli made mention to the fact that these horses rarely come back the same after these types of injuries. He always wants to do right by his horses. And so it would appear as if Two Phils may have run his last race, which was, as I mentioned, a dominant victory in the Grade 3 Ohio Derby over Bishop's Bay, over Haystrike, over Lord Miles, and another host of contenders. But obviously devastating news for Larry Rivelli, for Jareth Loveberry, who has had a no good, very bad week. He broke his arm earlier in the week at Canterbury. He was unable to ride Two Phils in that Ohio Derby, and now this obviously takes place. So a very tough week for Jareth Loveberry, a very tough week for Larry Rivelli, obviously a very tough week for Two Phils, from the euphoria of winning the Grade 3 Ohio Derby to now suddenly having his career in question. Seems as if, again, we are not going to see him for the rest of 2023 per Larry Rivelli. If we ever see him again, it seems highly doubtful. And this is just another gut punch in what has been a series of really bad stories, quite frankly, around this 3-year-old crop, from the breakdown of Wild on Ice while training for the Kentucky Derby to all of the drama surrounding Forte scratching out of the Kentucky Derby. And now you see a horse like Two Phils, whose future in the sport is in serious question. It's just very sad to see. Obviously, I was going to talk, and I did talk in my earlier recording, about how impressive Two Phils looked in that Ohio Derby. He just looked to be in a whole different class of horse. Anyone who thought that Bishop's Bay or Lord Miles or Haystrike or Henry Q was in the same league as Two Phils had those notions very quickly vanquished. Two Phils looked so impressive in that victory and was so much the best, and just made it look easy going around the far turn, going wide, and looking so good. And you figured it was such an easy victory for him that he would emerge okay, but ultimately emerged with an ankle injury. Larry Rivelli did make mention to the fact that there were already stud farms who were interested in Two Phils prior to that Ohio Derby. It's very possible that that is where he will head next, is to the stud barn, and that he will never step foot on the track again. Very sad news, but obviously a real blow to the 3-year-old crop. He was a horse that I think a lot of us had pegged as an up-and-coming horse prior to the Derby. Anybody who watches this show and watches Trust the Profit stuff knows how much I liked Two Phils going into that Kentucky Derby. He was a horse going all the way back to the Lecomte that I had really liked a lot. And he ran a huge race that Kentucky Derby, comes back and runs a huge race in the Ohio Derby, recorded another 105 Beyer speed figure. That had been 3 consecutive 100-plus Beyer speed figures, the only horse in the 3-year-old crop to record such a feat. So he was in uncharted territory as it relates to this 3-year-old crop. Nobody else had recorded back to back to back 100 plus Beyer speed figure efforts, 101 in the Jeff Ruby, 105 in the Kentucky Derby, 105 in the Ohio Derby. And that's ultimately how his career will likely end. So obviously very upsetting. He had been planned to go to the Haskell and then up to Saratoga. Obviously, those plans are out the window now with this ankle injury. We're just hoping for the best for him, that he's able to live a productive life and he's able to be a horse and just be able to enjoy his life in that regard for as long as he's around. So, like I said, very sad news to start off the show, but something that obviously was very breaking, and wanted to bring you all the most up-to-date information as it relates to Phils. Now, what else took place from that Ohio Derby weekend? There was a lot going on in that race. Bishop's Bay, I think we realized, is a cut below some of the top-tiered horses. If there is a Brad Cox horse that is maybe going to make an impression, obviously we've seen Angel Empire run well, but maybe First Mission. But again, First Mission looks to be on the bench for another 4 to 5 months at this point as well. So a lot of injuries in this crop. There's not a lot of, it's quite fascinating. Going into the summer at Saratoga, it would appear to be Mage, Forte, Archangelo, Tapatrice, Angel of Empire, maybe a couple of others, but those would be your primary shooters. And of course, you have those West Coast horses, Bob Baffert horses potentially coming back, Arabian Lion. If Arabian Night ever gets back on the track, we'll have to wait and see. If Cave Rock ever gets back on the workout tab, we'll have to wait and see. Go Rocket Ride for Richie Mandela appears to be coming back for the Haskell. So, there are some other horses that are certainly in the pipeline, but this was obviously a big blow to the 3-year-old crop. Well, I wanted to talk about one other race that took place at Thistledown on Saturday, and that was the Lady Jacqueline Stakes. And that was a really impressive effort from Leda Vita. This is a very good horse. And the reason I wanted to bring up Leda Vita was it really is one of 2 Ignacio Correas IV fillies and mares who have exploded onto the scene this year. Leda Vita has now won a grade 3, or it wasn't a grade 3, but it was a listed graded stakes, and it's had a beautiful trip. Interstate Daydream had all sorts of trouble. I don't know what Florent Giroux is doing with that horse in terms of, it really took that horse back. And I will say Interstate Daydream passed more horses in that Lady Jacqueline Stakes than she has ever passed in her entire career combined. Because she's not a horse that traditionally passes a lot of people. She runs, if she starts the race third, she finishes the race third. If she starts the race first, she finishes the race first. She doesn't pass a lot of people, though. So, she showed a lot of guts coming from the back and making a lot of passing. But ultimately, Leda Vita got a beautiful ride. And I bring it up because, again, Ignacio Correas IV has another really great turf filly and mare, and that's Didia. So he's got Didia, he's got Leda Vita. It's interesting. These are 2 horses that both came up from Latin America, from Chile and Argentina. And I think there is a little bit of a prejudice for most North American audiences of, show me something when you're coming over from Latin America of, I don't know how good this competition is. Let's actually see it on the track. And we've seen both of these fillies and mares be very, very successful. So I'm a big fan of this barn. I think I'm a big fan of these 2 horses in particular. I'm excited about what these 2 can continue to do over the summer. So that was obviously a big win, though, in the Lady Jacqueline Stakes. But wanted to make sure to give a shout out to Leda Vita. Might have cashed a ticket. That's maybe another rooting interest of why I wanted to give a shout out to that horse. But honestly, a great ride there in that race and a great effort. Well, let's shift from stateside to the other side of the pond, and let's talk a little bit about Royal Ascot and obviously reviewing what took place at that meet. And there was a lot going on. There were winners, there were losers. We could devote an entire episode just to that. I think from a winning standpoint, you got to look at Frankie Dettori, his final go-round, his final farewell at Royal Ascot, and he went out in style, winning numerous races over the champion meet, and ultimately finishing with 81 career victories at Royal Ascot. Absolutely incredible feat. And he delivered some sensational moments, whether it was on Gregory or a few other horses that he rode to the winner's circle. But really, like I said, tremendous effort there from Frankie Dettori, who just continues to have kind of just a honeymoon and just kind of a riding off into the sunset. You couldn't script this much better in terms of his farewell tour here in the United States and abroad. Now, There were also some horses that earned some people who didn't have as good of a week. And one of those individuals was Charlie Appleby and Godolphin. Interestingly enough, that's a name obviously a lot of North American horse racing fans know because Appleby brings over so many horses to the United States to run either in New York or in the Breeders' Cup. But Appleby had a really cold week, and Godolphin did not have a particularly good week. When you take a look at all of the horses that they entered, their likely chances of winning based on the morning line and then where they actually finished. It's been a fascinating year for Appleby. I've made this mention before, but he struggled a little bit this year. It's not been the same dominant Charlie Appleby. When he's brought horses over here to the United States, they've not been winning at a 60, 70% clip like they normally do. In fact, a lot of them haven't been winning at all. So it's noteworthy that it seems like maybe this is a little bit of a down year for the Appleby barn, something just to make note of. Listen, Charlie Appleby is one of the best trainers in the world. A down year for him is a career year for 99% of trainers. Godolphin's not going anywhere. They're going to continue to be the biggest name in the sport from a breeding and owning standpoint. So they're going to be right back. But it is notable that they did not have maybe as strong of a Royal Ascot meet, and maybe that barn is not quite as deep as it has been in previous years. Now, one person who had a sensational week at Royal Ascot was the O'Brien family, mostly Aiden, but even Joseph got a couple of nice runners. Joseph O'Brien, I think, had Rogue Millennium, who was a nice horse that crossed the wire at 10-1. So he had some success as well, but Aiden had a huge week. River Tiber looks really good. And then the one that I wanted to show you was Paddington, who just looks so good. And one of the things that I'm going to start doing a little bit more on the Win Play show is show highlights from the weekend. And so here's a race that Paddington was in at Royal Ascot over the last week. And he's on the outside in those orange and blue silks, coming up the middle of the track now. And you see Caldine up there on the front end, and that's a great horse jockeyed by Frankie Dettori. And when Paddington and Ryan Moore get going, though, there's no competition. This horse was just in another league. He was physically bigger, as you saw him past Caldine. He's just a physically bigger horse. He's an impressive horse, and he's one that just it looks to be so good for Aiden O'Brien, and was able to win by open lengths in a really contentious race. So Paddington, a horse that I think we're all really excited about seeing. And if we get to see him in the United States, that would be particularly thrilling at Santa Anita, perhaps in the Breeders' Cup. But he is one that definitely, like I said, had a great week in terms of Aiden O'Brien. Now, Aiden had a great week. Joseph had a great week. Frankie had a great week. Charlie didn't have as good of a week. Godolphin didn't have as good a week. Wesley Ward also did not have a very good week. Wesley Ward runners went over there and did very little. Twilight Gleaming didn't run much. American Rascal didn't run much. Now, in the case of American Rascal, I don't know what what the plan was. Didn't really get him out of the gate that quickly, was sitting kind of mid-pack, and just never really pushed him hard. I mean, it was one of those things where I kept thinking, okay, Joel's going to really start going to him. Joel's really going to start going to him. Okay, Joel's really going to start going to him at some point. He just never did. And maybe he realized he just didn't have the horse under him, and he just said, we'll just keep it wrapped up. But he just never really showed that urgency that you really need to show in those European straight sprints. Again, we talk about this sometimes. American horses are so accustomed to the turn on those sprints because it's an opportunity for them to catch their breath, slow things down for a second. You naturally are slowing down a little bit because you're going around the turn, and so you can't go quite as fast as you did going down the stretch, or the centripetal force will take you too wide. So American horses are used to that. American jockeys may be a little used to that as well. And if you watch European sprints, it's a straight shot, and those jockeys start pumping away with about 3 furlongs to go, and they really get after their horses, and you just didn't see that urgency from Rosario. So, it's one of those things where American Rascal just kind of made a no-show performance. Twilight Gleaming made it kind of a no-show performance. Christophe Clement's horse, Big Invasion, gave it a go, but ultimately wasn't quite good enough to stack up to the European competition. Classic Causeway, the Ken McPeak horse, I have no idea what that horse was doing over there in that spot, was just completely outclassed. And I'm pretty sure that was just a financial incentive to bring that horse over to Europe, because otherwise that horse had no business being in a Group 1 over in Europe, and ran like it. I mean, was beaten, I think, by 15 lengths. And everybody else was close together, and then he was 11 lengths behind even the fifth place finisher. So it just was not in the same class. That said, Americans did have a bright spot. So it wasn't all bad news for us. George Weaver. shout out to George Weaver and the training staff there. The trainer, he did a fantastic job at getting his horse, Crimson Advocate, ready. That's a horse that won a Group 2 on Wednesday at Royal Ascot, and a brilliant ride from the Hall of Famer Johnny Velasquez. This is the type of ride you would hope Joel Rosario would do every once in a while. Velasquez gets Crimson Advocate out there on the front end and then gets the jump on the field from the front end and is the first one to really push his horse to go. And all of a sudden you see Crimson Advocate open up lengths on everybody else. And now suddenly everybody else is in chase mode. And it is Crimson Advocate who is dictating terms, is able to hold off competition right there at the end, wins a head bob and wins a photo. But just an incredible ride by Johnny Velasquez. Great effort from Crimson Advocate and a great story for George Weaver. So congratulations to him getting that American victory at the Royal Ascot meet. Now, that said, we also had some success from a breeding standpoint. We saw American bred horses actually get some wins. We saw Malibu Moon, a progeny of him. We saw Nyquist and a progeny of his winning races over at Royal Ascot. So we did see some American lineage and American bloodstock over there doing well. So that's always good to see. So there was some American presence. But like I said, for the second year in a row, I think maybe even the third year in a row, Wesley Ward runners falling kind of flat and not really living up to the hype. And American Rascal, will end up seeing what ends up happening with that horse. That's one that I just don't know. I know there's some debate about what's the right surface for that horse. Is he really a turf horse? Is he better on dirt? I thought he could go both ways. Maybe he is just a dirt horse. We'll have to wait and see. Well, that was a big week over at Royal Ascot. And thank you again to everybody who tuned in on Saturday for our live stream. We had a lot of fun. Huge shout out to Carson, who joined me for all 4 hours of that live stream, as well as the guys from On the Wrong Lead, Josh Rodriguez, Caleb Knight. They came on, hung out with me for a good chunk of it as well. So that was a lot of fun. Appreciate all the comments and all the engagement there. Had over 1,100, 1,200 people checking in throughout the day. So that was really awesome to get that sort of engagement here on the channel. Well, let's move back stateside and let's go over to Ellis Park. And Ellis Park is fascinating because we talked about this race, this whole course last week, as that's where the Monomoy Girl Stakes were. And I mentioned early speed's pretty deadly there. And a horse that proved it over the weekend was Society, the Brad Cox horse, the Steve Asmussen horse, I should say, and the daughter of Gunrunner, just absolutely blew the barn doors off of stakes competition at Ellis Park on Saturday, absolutely crushing Monterey and Dry Farrows and anybody else who was anywhere close. She won by 10.5 lengths on the wire in a stakes competition and earned a 105 Beyer speed figure. Listen, Society is an interesting horse in that she is, when she's on, man alive, she looks to be a world beater. But when she is pressed and when she is against the track, she is not nearly as dominant. She needs to be on a speed favoring track. She needs to kind of be lonely speed. If she has those conditions, you're going to see something amazing. If she doesn't have those conditions, you're not going to see something particularly amazing. Those were the conditions that she had at the Cotillion last year at Parks on Pennsylvania Derby Day. Florent Giroux that day got her out there 5 lengths clear of the field, and she just blew them off their feet. And you saw on Saturday, they did the same thing, just got out there, set the pace, and then just drew away and looked to just have plenty in the tank. She's a super talented filly. I like her a lot, but you got to know track conditions. You got to know track biases, and you got to look at what other speeds in the race. Otherwise, she's a little bit of a question mark in some of those tougher spots. But under the right conditions, she is a dominant filly, as she demonstrated, really beating a nice group of fillies in terms of Dry Farrows and Monterey and Hidden Connection and a few others. Well, let's go from the Atlantic across, we went from, the middle of the country to England, then we came back to the middle of the country. Now let's go the other direction. We're going to go over the Pacific and we're going to go to Japan. And the reason I stayed up until 2:45 on Saturday night, Sunday morning is to see the number one horse in the world run. And that was Equinox, who came back in stakes competition, Group 1 stakes competition in Japan after the first start since running over in the Middle East. And man alive, did he prove his number one ranking, because he is a horse that was meant to be, because the commentators even talked about this before the race. Equinox was meant to be a horse that was positioned mid-pack or maybe even a little bit above mid-pack. ultimately ended up sitting second to last in the 17-horse field. Superstar international jockey Christophe Lemaire is on the mount and swings the horse wide around the far turn and goes exceptionally wide to get the win for Equinox. And I'm going to show you a clip from this race. And what I want you to do is keep an eye on the maroon cap and the powder blue and maroon silks. That's Equinox, and that is Christophe Lemaire. And you will see just how wide that horse goes. So you can see he's on the outside right now, going 10, 12 wide around the turn, going so far that he almost goes off the screen, and now comes for home. And here's the thing. Look at Lemaire. You would think a jockey may panic in this situation. Doesn't even have the crop out. He is simply handwriting Equinox at this point. And by the way, what a beautiful shot of all those horses running in a full field over in Japan. But finally gets the whip out right at the end just to show the horse. Doesn't even need to use the crop at all. Goes 10 to 12 wide, circles the field, goes from second to last to first. And again, just did it all under a hand ride. Could not have looked more impressive. It's why I stayed up until just an obscene time in the morning on Saturday night, Sunday morning. I had to end up taking a nap later in the day. I don't know the last time I took a nap, but that was something I had to end up doing. But it was worth staying up late because that was just a brilliant ride. Or maybe not a brilliant ride because he kind of got Equinox in a little too much trouble, but it was a brilliant effort by Equinox ultimately in that group stakes race. And ultimately, Lemaire knows what he has under him. He knows how good this horse is, and he's ridden him plenty. And he knows I can give up all the ground. I can go as wide as you want, and I'm still going to beat him. And that was sadly kind of what we saw with Two Phils as well. Gerardo Corrales, who took over for Jareth Loveberry on Saturday, he just kept Two Phils out in the clear, wide the whole way, and just said, the only way I lose this race is if I get in trouble. The best way to stay out of trouble, I'll just stay wide. And he just stayed wide and just put him away. And that's what makes his sudden news all the more devastating. One of the things that I wanted to talk about that took place off the track this past weekend, and I debated talking about this because, I'm somebody who I respect people's background. I respect their opinions on matters. I don't like coming off as preachy in any way, shape, or form. But it was a story that I was very bothered by, and it was one that should not have been a story, but sadly it was. And that was the New York Racing Association tweeting out support for the LGBTQ plus community in a very innocuous tweet, simply stating their support of Pride Week and Pride Day and supporting people of that background in horse racing and making sure to articulate that Nyra and New York racing is a open and safe environment for people of all different backgrounds to come and enjoy horse racing. This tweet elicited so many disappointing responses, and disappointing is the nicest word I can use. Mean, bigoted, hateful, hurtful, ignorant. I mean, these are all words that could describe the responses that you ended up seeing in this tweet. And the reality is that the responses to the tweet are the very reason tweets like this are necessary, because people do not want to have open representation of different groups or open celebration of different groups. Oh, sure, everything's fine and dandy as long as we don't actually talk about anything. It's very disappointing to see. Now, listen, I understand if people if they have religious beliefs, philosophical beliefs in which they disagree with the LGBTQ plus lifestyle. You're listening to someone who was raised in an evangelical church, whose parents owned the book, and I'm not making this up, Christians Don't Dance, who went to a former Southern Baptist affiliated university for college, and who studied the intersection of evangelical politics and the Republican Party in grad school. Trust me, I've spent most of my academic life and professional career studying evangelical politics and being immersed in that world. I understand it. I also understand that this is a population, in terms of the LGBTQ plus population, that has been historically oppressed. Members of this community are 7 times more likely to face hate crimes than members than individuals who are not part of this community. Bisexual teens are committing suicide at attempting suicide at a 27% rate and thinking about attempting suicide at a 48% rate. And it is because, in part, the pressure that they feel to conform to societal norms and understanding that they are ostracized from entire social groups and communities because of who they are and who they choose to love. We in horse racing are looking to grow this sport, and being hostile to an entire population simply because of a tweet acknowledging their existence, to me, is grotesque. We need to acknowledge the existence of lots of historically oppressed groups that have not gotten their due, that are still being oppressed in different ways, shapes, and forms. And having a token week and a token month in which we celebrate a community that, as I said, has been historically oppressed is the least we can do. We should be trying to emulate that behavior the other 11 months or 364 days out of the year that we're not tweeting about these types of topics. It's something that, again, if we are going to be inclusive, if we are going to grow this sport, then we need to have both arms open to all comers. We need to let the LGBTQ community, we need to let all historically oppressed communities know that horse racing is a safe and welcoming place for them to come and visit. That coming to the track will be a fun and positive experience for them. One where they will not face discrimination, one where they will not face hate and bigotry. They're dealing with that in their regular lives. And if you don't believe that, I don't know what to tell you, because I see it every day from my LGBTQ plus friends. It is something that we as a society need to work on. And seeing the responses to an innocuous tweet was just so disappointing. So disappointing. We have to do better as a sport. We have to do better as a society. I understand if you may have philosophical and religious differences to that group, but not making them feel welcomed is a whole nother discussion. Using that as an excuse for hate is a whole nother discussion, and something that, based upon my reading of the Bible, is not something that is particularly Christian-like. Now, like I said, I don't get on my soapbox often for these social issues, but it's something that, like I said, really did bother me to see all of the animosity and all of the venom towards this community, when we should be embracing all communities and making sure that it is a safe place for people to come and visit and have a good time. That's what we should be out of the track for, is having a good time, making everybody feel welcome, no matter what their background is. And having a colorful rainbow flag doesn't hinder your rights and your desires and your liberties. It just makes somebody else feel a little bit safer and a little bit more welcomed in a community and in a neighborhood. That's the least we can do for a group that just got basic civil rights within the last decade of marriage and adoption. All right. Now, I'm going to get off my soapbox. All right. I appreciate you listening to me for a little while there. But we've had a lot of LGBTQ plus guests on the show over the last year and a half, and they've been wonderful. But I also know that they're in tough situations sometimes in the industry. So, it's something that there's a lot more of those individuals in the industry than you would realize. And if you realized it, you might have a different feeling towards it. Now, let's finish up this episode on a happy note, and that is talking about the one, the only, the rated R superstar. No, not Edge. Actually just the rated R superstar, the horse. That's right. Rated R superstar has been retired and turned out to Old Friends Farm. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful news. This was a grade 3 winning horse at 9 years old. He was winning it for all the old guys out there. You had to love it. Came back at 10, gave some gutty efforts, particularly at Oaklawn Park, which is where he seemed to really enjoy riding later in his career. But his ownership group let people know, listen, the on-off Lasix was really starting to become problematic. He was starting to really face a lot of issues here, and it was very it was pretty obvious that therapeutic use of Lasix and not being allowed to use Lasix in different spots was going to be detrimental to the horse. And so rather than trying to continue to take him off on Lasix or running off Lasix, they chose the best thing to do was to retire the horse. And he was very fortunate to be accepted at Old Friends Farm. So that's going to be, I think a very, very popular horse that a lot of people are going to visit. So I know myself included. And just because I have a connection to the other rated R superstar in professional wrestling, and that's a long story that some of you know and some of you may not know, but that's one for another day. But love this particular horse, rated R superstar, and obviously wishing him and his connections all the best, and hoping for rated R to have a nice, long, lengthy life just being a horse out on the farm. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week, friends. My name is Matthew DeSantis, and make sure to press that like and subscribe button here. Until next week, remember, have a great and profitable day at the races, and remember that it's now post time.